Your monthly subscription box from postflybox.com includes all the materials needed to tie a dozen flies, along with some extra goodies. The Crust Nymph is a versatile fly pattern that can be used to imitate a range of mayfly species when they're nymphs, including PMDs, Hendricksons, and March Browns. The foundation of the fly is a size 12 hook along with a 2.4 mm copper bead. Begin by inserting the point of the hook into the small hole of the bead and working the bead up the shank to behind the eye. You can then get the assembly firmly secured in the jaws of your tying vise. Pick up the coil of solder wire, and while holding the bitter end in the fingertips of your left hand, start taking wraps around the hook shank with your right. After 5 or 6 turns, helicopter the wire to break it off close. Take just the smallest amount of superglue, here Fly Tire Z-Men, and apply it to the hook shank between the bead and the wire wraps. Then quickly push the wire wraps forward into the open back end of the bead. Hold the wraps there for a few seconds to allow the adhesive to set, then tuck in that pesky little tail end of wire. Load a bobbin with a spool of rusty brown unithread. Get the thread started on the hook shank at the back edge of the wire wraps. Once you have the thread well anchored, snip the excess tag end off close. Take thread wraps over top of the wire wraps to further stabilize them, then end with your tying thread at the back edge of the wire. Pick up a single mallard flank feather and strip the lower fluffy fibers free from the stem. On one side of the stem, pull down 20 or so fibers, and while keeping their tips aligned, squeeze them tight between your fingers. Then snip them off close to the stem. Still, while keeping the tips aligned, pass the fibers to your right hand. Measure to form a tail a hook shank in length, then transfer that measurement rearward to the start of the hook bend. Using the back edge of the wire wraps as a guide, snip the butt ends of the fibers off square. Place the fibers on top of the hook shank, then give your bobbin a good counterclockwise spin as if you're looking down on it. This will cause the first wrap of thread to jump rearward and catch the butt ends of the fibers. Lift the fibers up and toward you as you take thread wraps rearward all the way to the start of the hook bend. Ideally, this will coax the fibers into landing on top of the hook shank as opposed to being pushed to the far side of it. Advance your tying thread forward with tight wraps until it once again hangs at the back edge of the wire. Locate the black floss and snip an 8 to 10 inch length free. This will be enough to make numerous flies. Secure one end of the floss to the top of the hook shank with wraps of tying thread, allowing the thread to push the floss over to the far side of the fly as you go. End with your thread just in front of the hook point. Rusty brown dubbing is used to form the body of the fly. Pull an ample clump free from the packet. Use the dubbing to create a fairly slender 3-inch long noodle on your tying thread. Start taking wraps with the noodle so the dubbing begins right at the base of the tail. Continue taking tight, slightly overlapping wraps up the hook shank, ending just shy of the bead. Get hold of the black floss and twist it up a bit, then make open spiral wraps with it to rib and segment the fly. At the back edge of the bead, firmly anchor the floss with tight wraps of tying thread. Once the floss is bound down well, use your scissors to snip the excess off close. Leave your tying thread a bead length back from the bead. Pick up a single strand of the pearl flashabou and snip off a 4-inch length, which will be enough to make numerous flies. Place one end of the material on top of the hook shank so it abuts the back edge of the bead. Take nice firm wraps of tying thread to bind the slippery flashabou down well. This will be the wing case of the fly, and it should be a little more than 1/3 of a hook shank in length. To create the fly's thorax, pull a small clump of the hare's ear dubbing free from the packet and use it to make a very slender 1.5-inch long noodle on your tying thread. Start taking wraps with the noodle to create a slightly bulbous little thorax on the fly, ending with your tying thread at the back edge of the bead. Pull the flashabou forward and bind it down well with thread wraps. Then pull the forward pointing flashabou back and lock that down with thread wraps. This will ensure that it can't pull free. Use your tying scissors to snip the excess Flashabou off close. Reach for your whip finish tool and use it to do a 5 or 6 turn whip finish. Seat the knot really well, then snip your tying thread free. A drop of head cement, here Sally Hansen's Hard as Nails, applied to the exposed thread wraps will ensure they don't come unraveled and that the Flashabou won't pull free. And that's the Crust Nymph. It's kind of remarkable just how many nymphs this one fly can imitate, and trout like them all.